So I got a couple of tweets here from James Thorne I'm going to read through real quick, and they're very AI, but there's interesting stuff in them. He says, Bessent remembers 1998. Scott Bessent was in the room where it happened. In 2026, as Treasury Secretary, he helped direct a joint U.S.-Japan intervention to support the yen after it plunged to a 40-year low, with Treasury signaling banks to stand ready and using the New York Fed as the market arm of the operation. That move makes more sense when you remember where Bessent came from. He's not some Fed academic who discovered financial panic in a seminar room. He was at Soros Fund Management's London office in the 1990s when Soros attacked the Hong Kong peg and the Asian crisis began to metastasize through global markets. This is the missing context the street keeps ignoring, Wall Street. The LTCM, which is long-term capital management collapse, did not drop from the sky as a random failure of genius in Greenwich. It grew out of a chain of shocks. Pressure on Asian pegs, then Russia's default, then a violent scramble through credit and currency markets that broke every model built on stable correlations and liquid exits. By September of 1998, the Federal Reserve had gathered 14 firms to inject about $3.6 billion into long-term capital management to stop the damage from spreading. So the through line is not subtle. Back then, Bessent was on the trading side, helping test the pegs and learning how quickly policymakers can weaponize rates and balance sheets. Today, he's on the official side, moving early to support the yen before another disorderly unwind turns into a modern LCCM. Think about that for 1 minute as the pedantic Wall Street pundits criticize from afar. So, what this is doing is it's creating a huge mark-to-market pressure for a lot of assets that the financialists have borrowed against, maintaining overflated valuations. Now, if they get marked to market where you have to say, no, you have to go, we're going to call you on this, and you're going to have to go like open the box, open the black box, and find out what the thing inside it is actually worth. So this is triggering a massive liquidity crunch. And Scott Bessent right now is sitting there with the largest liquidity button in the world. And all of the entire offshore dollar scheme that has been the foundation for the regime, for the entire globalist order, they are all getting margin called to hell. They're going to need liquidity. They're going to need a source of dollars. This is the monkey's paw curling. You built your whole scheme on dollars. Well, guess what? Guess who just took control of the dollars? Yeah, now you need some? You can't find them anywhere? They're drying up everywhere? Your really cheap supply that you thought you were going to have forever? Yeah, that's gone now. And actually, not only is it gone, but it's moving against you. All of that leverage is going to come crashing down. This is why the Iran war is happening right now. Incidentally, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's call for the Fed to boost a facility that Japan can use to support its currency has put renewed attention on the ties between the two institutions, which typically operate at arm's length. Look at this. We're getting calls now from the Treasury to the Fed to operate more in lockstep explicitly with the Treasury. I wonder who's been predicting that the Fed is going to be pulled much more under the direction of the Treasury. So this is from Bloomberg, and I tried to figure out how to get. I'm going to use this in a thumbnail at some point. I couldn't get it in. I couldn't make it work in today's thumbnail, but. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's call for the Federal Reserve to boost a facility that Japan can use to support its currency has put renewed attention on the ties between the two institutions, which typically operate at arm's length. After the Treasury joined forces with Japan to prop up the yen, Bessent on Sunday praised the Fed's Foreign and International Monetary Authority's repo facility, or FEMA, which allows foreign governments to access dollars using their Treasury holdings as collateral. In a post on social media, Bessent described the Fed facility as an important support for Japan's efforts and said, "We would encourage it to be upsized in the coming months." Take that with the comment that he made on the video I just played, where he said, this isn't just a market intervention. This is a new policy set. And he's now issuing the official public diplomatic overture to the Fed saying, hey, be prepared to keep doing this. Japan is being bought out by the United States from the City of London. Japan confirmed it bought yen on Friday and would use the Fed facility in the future, Finance Minister Satsuki Katayama said in a statement, and the Fed declined to comment. Cooperation between the Fed and Treasury to ensure financial stability isn't unusual, especially during periods of volatility, and market participants say jitters in Treasury yields offer a good reason for the Fed to help smooth the yen intervention. The yen-intervention, you might say. Since Japanese sales of its holdings could make things worse. Still, close Fed watchers said it's rare for the Treasury Secretary to publicly urge the central bank to make changes to any of its tools, especially one that falls under the authority of the policymaking Federal Open Market Committee. So this is also a compliance test of the Fed between the Treasury and the Fed. How much? Let's give you a trial run here. Are we going to operate in lockstep here? And it's also a way of ferreting out or sussing out the non-compliant members of the Fed. Benjamin 2X says, we're putting the bankers in FEMA camps. That's so good. Yeah. It's highly unusual, said Mark Sobel, a former senior Treasury official. In my era, Treasury secretaries were loath to speak about issues related to Fed monetary operations in public. Yep, it's not your era anymore, buddy. And were such a need to have arisen, they'd have spoken privately to the Fed chair and handled this behind the scenes. Now, I would imagine that these conversations have already happened, at least with the Fed chair. I would imagine that these were conversations that were had when Warsh was being interviewed. But there's a protocol to this. So the Treasury Secretary issuing making an official public offering or statement to the Fed, then gives the Fed the opportunity to publicly act in concert and make this a formal official public change in policy. The FEMA facility is designed to cushion the impact on U.S. bond yields when a foreign government is seeking dollars by offering them an alternative to selling their Treasury holdings. It has a limit of $60 billion per counterparty per day. An increase in the counterparty limit would need to be approved by the Fed's Foreign Currency Subcommittee, which sits under the FOMC, and is required to inform it of any planned changes. Bessent on Tuesday doubled down on his remarks that the Fed facility should be bigger. Quote, it would be reasonable for the Fed to consider upsizing the facility, he told CNBC in an interview, comparing FEMA to a currency swap line. It's a very robust facility, and it was set up for occasions just like this. Yeah, Jeffrey, this helps Warsh get full control much faster as well. Some fights you need to trigger. You need to prompt the fight to occur, but only when you know that you have the winning hand. So this is a statement of confidence by Bessent. Bessent has the call by Bessent comes as the Fed remains under political pressure from the White House not to raise rates, even with inflation well above the 2% target. President Donald Trump has repeatedly argued that rates should be lower. Bessent has in the past made a case for lower rates, though he took office promising not to discuss their direction. He has also talked up the idea of extending currency swap lines to more countries to strengthen dollar dominance, a move that would potentially require Fed support. This is part of why this is so big, because we're going to see more of this. This is how new subordinates of the American empire are going to be incorporated into the American empire. Stephen Kamen, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and former division director at the Fed, said it's in the Fed's interest to ensure that the spillover into bond yields is minimized if Japan, which has the world's largest foreign holdings of Treasury bonds, not actually true, it's the City of London, wants to offload some of them to buy yen. I'm not sure that the foreign exchange interventions are something that the FOMC wants to support, Kamen said. On the other hand, if countries like Japan are going to intervene anyway, thank you, Ballbegs. Better for them to do so without selling off treasuries. So it says the strategists warned prolonged use of the tool could backfire by inviting markets to test the commitment of the U.S. and Japan to strengthen the yen if doing so requires large sales of U.S. treasuries. See, here's the thing. They're addicted to them. They can't sell them. The only way they can sell them is if they come crawling to the United States and ask for some sort of accommodation. because they need the treasuries themselves because their entire financial models are built on the back of the U.S. Treasury. Expanding the facility wouldn't pose much risk to the Fed, either politically or through financial market exposure, said Eric Wallerstein, chief macro strategist for Clock Tower Group and previously an advisor to former Fed Governor Stephen Mirren. Because borrowing is short-term against Treasury collateral and requires an interest payment, there's no risk to the Fed, he said. Yet for Fed watchers, it was the public nature of Bessent's call that turned heads more so than the request itself, said Wolf Research's Tobin Marcus. I can't think of another instance where Treasury publicly called for this kind of Fed policy change rather than coordinating behind closed doors. This is a sea change. Not just the fact that they're doing it, that alone is big. But then Bessent is issuing a public demand to the Fed for the Fed to comply, which removes it's removing the illusion of independence while still sort of maintaining it. Because the Fed could choose not to comply. See, they're independent. So James Thorne again says, Bessent is not reacting. He's forcing Bretton Woods 2.0 and getting out in front. Bessent is emerging as the most consequential Treasury Secretary since Alexander Hamilton, and much of the policy establishment still does not see it. This is not a random turn in markets. It's the long-delayed reckoning for decades of excess leverage, central bank overreach, and willful policy blindness. The roadmap was written in Japan. Post-war growth, fueled by mercantilism and Bank of Japan directed credit, was supercharged through window guidance and artificially suppressed rates. The result was predictable, a historic asset bubble followed by collapse. One interesting thing about the Bank of Japan is that the Bank of Japan owns a huge amount of the Japanese stock market. So they actually are sort of uniquely constructed to be able to navigate this better than most other national banks or central banks would be able to. What came next? Zero rates, quantitative easing, and a permanent liquidity trap was not bad luck. It was the logical endpoint of sustained market distortion. U.S. policymakers studied it, then repeated it after the global financial crisis. The United States drifted into its own version of secular stagnation. Now that era is ending. Supply-side reform, deregulation, and pro-growth tax policies set in motion under Trump are colliding with a repricing of capital. This right here, a repricing of capital. And the return of private markets as the arbiter of credit and interest rates. The reality is unavoidable. The global economy is buried in debt. It cannot function with structurally high rates. Rates must come down not to stimulate excess, but to allow the real economy to breathe again. Enter Bessent. What he is executing alongside the Federal Reserve is not traditional yield curve control, it's strategic control of the long end. The 10-year yield is the fulcrum of the global system. This is not volatility, it's policy, and it carries real risk. The rise in long-end yields and the yen's devaluation are fault lines. The lessons of long-term capital management remain as relevant as ever. Bessent is getting out in front. The Keynesian response is predictable, hand-wringing over Treasury-Fed coordination, but this critique rests on a false premise, that the Federal Reserve should operate in isolation from elected leadership and national economic strategy. It never has, and it never will. Bessent is moving with intent, cutting off the IRGC's financial lifelines while managing the unwind of the yen carry trade. These are not isolated developments, they're coordinated moves to unwind distortions decades in the making. This is Bretton Woods 2.0, not just a financial system, but a strategic one. Rules matter, standards matter. The Clarity Act is not a side issue, it's a signal. The United States is writing the rules for the next era of capital formation, digital assets, and financial power. That some, particularly on the Warren left, fail to grasp this is not surprising, but it is consequential. I would say they don't fail to grasp this. They know exactly what's happening. And they recognize that this is this is like the B-2s are flying over and the bombs are about to drop down the little chute down into the nuclear facility. And there's nothing that they can do to stop it. Bessent is not reacting to markets, he's disciplining them and in the process redefining the system itself.